terminally ill would be allowed to take their own lives. This MP's bill will be published tomorrow. It would involve the self-administering of medication and long prison sentences for anyone coercing someone against their will. Also tonight, the Archbishop facing resignation calls from across the church over what he knew of a priest who abused more than 100 boys and young men. Did they or didn't they talk on the phone? The Kremlin denies a call between Trump and Putin as Ukraine's military warns that Russia could be about to launch a new assault. Standing up for Ukraine and the climate, Sir Keir Starmer's discussions with France's president before a flight to the global COP summit tonight. Blowing the whistle on 25 years in the football hot seat, why Sky News understands Gary Lineker will leave Match of the Day. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. Terminally ill people seeking to end their own lives would have to self-administer the deadly drugs under legislation to be published in Parliament tomorrow. MPs are getting the chance to decide whether to change the law on assisted dying in England and Wales for the first time in a decade. In details, just released, the new terminally ill adults end-of-life bill would also create a new crime punishable with up to 14 years in jail for coercing someone to end their life in this way. Our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, has the details.
I'm really passionately opposed to assisted suicide because I know what it feels like to be treated like a burden.
Jamie is voicing his own fears as the country thinks about allowing people to end their own lives.
My fundamental opposition comes from the fact that I think disabled people are incredibly vulnerable in society at the moment. There seems to have been an onslaught from all angles, and I think this leads to an incredibly high risk that pressure and being made to feel like a burden would lead people to take decisions they wouldn't otherwise take.
But the MP behind the end-of-life bill argues that both can happen. Good palliative care and the option to end your own life.
Why not fix palliative care and the NHS before you add to their burden?
Why not do both? Why not give people the autonomy and the dignity and the choice that they want at the end of life and fix palliative care and sort out the challenges within the NHS? It's possible to do both, and we've got a duty to do both, actually.
The details of the bill have been published. Only patients with 6 months to live can be considered. And the patient must, at every stage of the process, express a clear, settled and informed wish, free from coercion or pressure. 2 independent doctors must be satisfied that the person is eligible. The application then goes before a High Court judge who must hear from at least one of the doctors and may hear from and question the person making the application. If the patient still wishes to proceed, the medication must be self-administered. If the bill becomes law, it will be illegal, punishable by a sentence of up to 14 years in jail, to by dishonesty, coercion or pressure induce another person to make a declaration. And by dishonesty, coercion or pressure, induce another person to self-administer an approved substance.
There have been some concerns around the time frame with this legislation. Some MPs have expressed fears that they won't have enough time to study the fine detail. Well, that's been published now, but that won't allay concerns over the slippery slope or around palliative care in this country.
There are deep divisions inside Parliament. The Health Secretary is against it, and some doctors have concerns on self-administered deaths.
Assisted suicide, assisted dying is not like turning a light switch off. Often you have to drink about 3/4 of a pint, and that is, you have to do it quick, and it's caustic, and you're nervous.
The details of the bill might help to ease some of the concerns of people like Jamie. Others will need much more convincing. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, our political correspondent Liz Bates is in Westminster for us tonight. And Liz, a hugely sensitive issue. What is the balance in your assessment right now of support versus opposition in Parliament to this bill?
Well, it's so difficult to know because it was way back in 2015. It was the last time that MPs actually voted on this issue. And of course, Parliament looked very different then. There was no hope of them winning that vote at that time. It was 330 against, 118 MPs voted in favour. 200 didn't even bother to turn up. I think it could be very different this time round. Look, there are MPs that are set in their ways on both sides, but a huge amount in the middle who are, I think, still undecided and could be persuaded either way. And the challenge for Kim Leadbeater and her supporters is to reassure those people that the safeguards are in place and that they do have enough time to scrutinise that legislation. She's already had the Health Secretary and the Justice Secretary come out and say that they won't be supporting this legislation. So all eyes will be on other big figures in the Labour Party on whether they come out in support. But this is a live debate that will be going on for the next couple of weeks here in Westminster and all over the country, because lots of MPs are asking their constituents what they think and listening very hard to their views on this issue. They don't have a huge amount of time to make up their minds because the second reading will be on the 29th of November, and that is when we will get MPs voting for the first time in this Parliament on this issue. We'll find out then what the levels of support are.
Liz, in Westminster, thank you. The Archbishop of Canterbury is facing the biggest crisis in his 11 years at the top of the Church of England tonight. Justin Welby is under pressure to resign over what he knew about a priest who abused as many as 130 boys and young men over 5 decades. Those calling for him to quit include at least one of his own bishops. Our communities correspondent Lisa Holland reports.
It's actually not corrupt.
As leader of the Church of England, Justin Welby has presided over state occasions for over a decade. But with the Church in crisis, from grassroots clergy to bishops, there are calls for him to go.
Right, so what we got here then?
Stephen Kurt is the vicar of Christ Church in New Malden in South London. Like many others, he says the church is in danger of losing all credibility on safeguarding and is at a crossroads.
Justin Welby, sadly, has done really the worst thing that a Christian minister can do, which is put the well-being of the church as an institution above the well-being of people that the church is called to care for.
The horrific and sustained abuse of children by this man, John Smythe, has triggered the crisis. A report last week found Justin Welby failed to take the allegations seriously enough, and had he done so, Smythe may have been brought to justice. And in an extraordinary move, senior figures within the church's ruling body have launched an online petition calling on Justin Welby to step down.
It's not just about Justin for me, actually. There are other bishops who are named in this report as well, and there are other senior members of the clergy. And I think they also need to resign, because Justin needs to go in order to set the tone for that to happen.
In a statement, Lambeth Palace said the Archbishop reiterates his horror at the scale of John Smythe's egregious abuse. He has apologised profoundly both for his own failures and omissions and for the wickedness, concealment and abuse by the Church more widely. However, there's no sign yet of any of the pressure impacting the Archbishop of Canterbury's position. He has again insisted he will not resign. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
It is perhaps a taster of the rollercoaster ride of the next 4 years, the did they or didn't they saga of whether Donald Trump and President Putin spoke on the phone. An authoritative report in America said they did, the Kremlin says they didn't, and Donald Trump's campaign won't comment. If they did speak, though, it was reportedly on the future of Ukraine. Our Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett reports.
It is a relationship that Europe is watching with bated breath. Two strongmen who are reportedly talking again. Donald Trump is said to have spoken with Vladimir Putin the day after his election win last week. He apparently urged Russia's leader not to escalate the war in Ukraine. If that's true, it doesn't seem to have worked. Russian air attacks there last night killed 6 people, according to local authorities. Reports, too, of an imminent new offensive. But just when Ukraine needs Western support most, there are fears US aid will be cut once Trump assumes office. Commemorating other wars in Europe, Kyiv's allies remained upbeat. The message from France and Britain: don't jump to conclusions.
I expect a President Trump-led administration to recognise that it is in America's interests, it's in NATO's interests, it's in the interest of all countries that believe in the international rules-based order and a stable and secure peace that Putin does not prevail.
The trouble is, Ukraine's allies aren't the only ones trying to woo the new White House administration. Moscow seems to be too.
The Kremlin's denied the reports of a call, saying they're pure fiction and that Vladimir Putin has no concrete plans to speak with Donald Trump at present. But words and actions don't always align here. Last week, the Kremlin said Vladimir Putin had no plans to congratulate Donald Trump on his election win. But then, of course, he did just that.
And that's not all. He even praised Donald Trump's bravery, apparently hoping flattery will lead to a peace deal in Moscow's favour. But what do Russians think will happen? Will Trump live up to his promise to end the war soon?
Trump is a businessman, so there is a glimmer of hope that he will abandon the military methods of escalation and perhaps the situation in Europe will improve.
This was part of the election campaign. He doesn't control everything himself. There's still a complex political machine.
He is the president of the country that started this all. I think he will support the interests of his country. They were not in our favour from the beginning.
Perhaps the only certainty of the next Trump presidency is that it's impossible to predict. So right now, all sides are hoping for the best. Ivor Bennett, Sky News in Moscow.
Well, let's get more now on the reverberations from Donald Trump's election win from our US correspondent Mark Stone. And Mark, we saw President Biden and Kamala Harris today for the first time since the election. But for Donald Trump, it would seem he is looking ahead, including about Ukraine.
Yes, President Biden and Vice President Harris defeated, of course. We're at Arlington Cemetery today on this Remembrance Day, or as they call it here, Veterans Day. The first time we've seen the two of them together. The lame ducks, frankly, and all focus now is on the future, Trump 2.0 and what that looks like. And I think, you know, on Ukraine, as Ivor outlined there, I mean, an awful lot of concern, but an awful lot of uncertainty as well, quite what Trump's rhetoric will mean in reality. I think it's worth remembering that, yes, he is an isolationist, yes, he is America first, but he is also a man who does not like to lose. He likes to win. And so I think in the as soon as he's taken office, I think he will not want to be in a position where he does anything that makes it look like Vladimir Putin has won this war. I think that's an important point to remember. In the immediate term, though, in this lame duck presidency that we're now in, before President Trump is able to do anything, I think we can see a bloody, bloody time. We can see both sides trying to turn things to their advantage, to take as much land as they can, because they both know, Ukraine and Russia both know, that once President Trump takes office, there will be some sort of a resolution. There will be a call for both sides to come to an agreement, to a ceasefire. So short-term, bloody. Medium-term, the next 4 years, maybe Trump will pull something out the bag and make it look like he is the peacemaker. Longer-term, though, remember, Trump's only here for 4 years. Vladimir Putin, maybe a little longer. So longer-term, a short-term win, which is what Trump is all about, might turn into something a lot more difficult for Ukraine in 4 years' time.
Mark Stone, there in Washington. Thank you. Well, another place feeling the impact of Donald Trump's re-election is the global COP climate summit that began today in Azerbaijan. America's envoy, appointed, of course, by Joe Biden, said Donald Trump's relationship to climate change could be summed up by the words hoax and fossil fuels. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, reports now from Baku.
The 29th Climate Summit gets underway in a world now indisputably feeling the heat.
This crisis is affecting every single individual in the world, one way or another. That's why we're here in Baku. We must agree a new global climate finance goal.
But how, with the world's largest economy promising to walk away, negotiators are reeling, not least Team America, still led by Joe Biden's climate chief.
In January, we're going to inaugurate a president whose relationship to climate change is captured by the words hoax and fossil fuels. Facts are still facts. Science is still science. The fight is bigger than one election, one political cycle in one country.
But has he already lost his leverage? Diplomatically, is the US lame as a lame duck at these talks?
We've been good partners with people across the board. We continue to press our case, and we'll continue to do it. And we want to land. Remember, this is a 2035 commitment that we're trying to land.
John Podesta knows how to play that long game. He watched Donald Trump try and fail to pull out of this whole process once before. Goodwill may help the US close a climate finance deal that works for a future America without Donald Trump in the White House. But if that sounds hard, it's nothing compared to getting a deal that works for everyone. Climate finance means flows of money from the world that grew rich from fossil fuels to those still growing being asked not to burn them. A simple idea, but complicated by rich countries not wanting to burden taxpayers, others like China painting the picture it's still developing, so shouldn't pay either.
It has to come from everywhere. And it has to also come from recently rich countries, including China, India, and also oil-rich countries in the Middle East.
But world leaders arrive tomorrow with Mr. Trump's victory also on their minds. Are they willing to publicly empty their pockets and risk the ire of their voters with more immediate concerns than climate change? Tom Clark, Sky News, Baku.
Well, one of those flying into the COP summit is the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, even as many other world leaders do not attend. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, is in Baku tonight for us. And Sam, the Prime Minister answering questions on the way there over the shadow that Donald Trump is casting over this summit. So what did you learn?
That's right, Keir Starmer landed here in Baku in Azerbaijan about 3 hours ago, and there is no doubt that the entire global conversation has changed as a result of last week's US presidential elections. As you say, we were talking to the Prime Minister on the 5-hour journey over on the way here, and we were pressing him about those comments by Donald Trump in the last few days that climate change is a hoax. And he refused to directly engage with that argument. He said that climate change was important, and he talked about how the race to get green technology in this country means that perhaps America's position could present a huge opportunity for the UK, but he didn't directly take on Donald Trump. Now, rewind just a few hours. Keir Starmer was in Paris talking to President Macron about Ukraine, an issue of huge concern as a result of Donald Trump's re-election. But details about what they actually discussed, what they might do in the event that the White House in future pulls funding for the Ukraine war, well, they were scant as well. Leaders not willing to make an argument. I think this is the problem that Keir Starmer and other Western nations now face with the election of Donald Trump. On the one hand, they are desperately looking to mitigate and to oppose what Donald Trump does, but they don't have the confidence to make those arguments in public for fear of upsetting him and there being consequences against the nations that they run. That is the problem that Donald Trump poses, and nobody really yet seems to have an answer.
Sam, live for us there in Azerbaijan. Thank you. Well, he's been presenting Match of the Day for longer than some of his viewers have been alive. But Sky News understands tonight that Gary Lineker will leave the long-running BBC programme at the end of the season. It follows the continuing publicity about the size of his salary and his sometimes controversial comments on social media. Well, let's bring in our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, who's with me now. So questions then. Rob, when will he go? And do we actually know why?
We don't know exactly why, but Gary Lineker has been talking about slowing down for some time at 63. And what I understand is he will still present the BBC's coverage of the 2026 Men's World Cup in North America as part of a contract extension. He could also perhaps have other projects on the BBC, but his stint on Match of the Day will end At the end of the season, in May of 2025, after being on our screens on Match of the Day since 1999, he really has become that footballing institution as well as a Saturday night television institution as well. A huge transformation from being the England captain with his scoring prowess into succeeding Des Lynam to become such a television institution. But with that status, there was friction caused by his desire to have this social conscience, particularly using social media to express political views. It forced him off air last year when he criticised the then Tory government's small boats policy. He stood firm, and ultimately there was a change in the BBC social media guidelines. But at the same time, he's also commented on football. That's caused conflict with the Football Association. He criticised the England team at the Euros on his own podcast, and that is his next direction because he has been growing a huge podcasting empire over the last 5 years that now has his podcast listened to by 40 million people a month, from history to politics and sport. So he's become this millionaire entrepreneur. And it's those millions that actually some say he no longer needs to earn the BBC salary, and there has been huge pressure for the BBC to cut the pay of its highest earner on £1.3 million. And this would allow the BBC also to introduce huge changes across BBC Sport, with the new BBC Sports boss wanting his own vision of Match of the Day, which will continue with now the search for a new presenter as this footballing institution enters a new chapter, but without Gary Lineker after this season.
Yes, see what more he has to say on it. Rob, thank you. Well, one of the officials who regularly appears on Gary Lineker's show won't be for the foreseeable future. The Premier League referee, David Coote, has been suspended after a video emerged showing him making disparaging comments about Liverpool Football Club and their former manager, Jurgen Klopp. Well, Coote was in charge of Liverpool's most recent game against Aston Villa on Saturday night, but has now been stood down pending a full investigation. The video showed him using several expletives to describe the club and his relationship with Klopp. Kemi Badenoch has admitted the television drama, The Post Office versus Mr Bates, prompted the government to speed up the process of compensating victims of the Horizon scandal. Giving evidence to the Post Office inquiry, the new Conservative leader and former business secretary also said bureaucracy was allowed to get in the way of redress for sub-postmasters. Dan Khalif, whose escape from Wandsworth Prison last year led to a nationwide manhunt, has changed his plea to guilty midway through his trial for escaping from lawful imprisonment. The former soldier was on remand when he absconded last September after being accused of spying on behalf of Iran. Now, one of the toughest nights Sir Keir Starmer encountered during the election campaign was when he was questioned by voters in the towns of Grimsby and Cleethorpes live here on Sky News. One audience member told him he came across as a political robot, and he's told us he still thinks that's the case. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, presented the programme and returned to Grimsby to find out how the new government is going down.
Grimsby and Cleethorpes on the Humber Estuary, home to Sky News' election target towns, and one of the seats that helped tip the balance for Starmer on the 5th of July. Welcome to Grimsby Town Hall, where we're joined tonight by the two men vying for the keys to Downing Street. Sharon, hi. It's so nice to see you again. Thank you for coming along. So we're back to catch up with some of the voters who put their questions at the Sky News Leaders event. Sharon, Cayman and Amy. A few months in, Keir Starmer's first budget's finally given the contours of Labour's plans, and it's not exactly as advertised before people went to the polls.
No tax rises in the next Parliament.
No tax rises needed in the plans in our manifesto.
In the plans.
No tax rises for working people.
Lifelong Labour voter Sharon wanted to know if Starmer really wouldn't put up taxes in order to invest.
How it's all going to be funded? If tax is not going up, how are you going to fund it?
We need to put money and resource into Grimsby. We need resource decision-making to come.
That was the question, Sharon, wasn't it? How are you going to fund it?
Yeah, absolutely. And following the budget, I actually think I've been indirectly taxed.
I couldn't bring myself to vote for Keir because I was worried that things like this may happen. You know, he wants to bring the growth into the country. How have we done that? By, putting the burden on businesses to grow.
For Cayman, a question foreshadowing the concerns that have plagued the early days of Starmer's premiership.
You seem more like a political robot.
Well, for most of...
Has he loosened up a bit since Cayman?
I feel like he's still a robot, yeah.
Still robotic.
Still
okay.
robotic, yeah.
The jury's still very much out on this new government after a budget that came as a surprise to voters and to the Labour MP who won this seat for Starmer. In the days after the budget, taxes going up for small businesses in Grimsby, were you surprised by it?
I was, which I've been told not to keep saying.
It's been a difficult start for Starmer, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think you'd be, a bit blind to say that you hadn't seen a bit of a rocky start.
A political landslide that stands on shaky ground. Starmer gambling that his big budget will pay off and persuade voters about him and his government. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Great Grimsby.
We finish Sky News at 10 tonight with the tributes paid to the war dead at the Armistice Day commemorations. From the cenotaph to Paris and Washington, those who fell in battle in the world wars and other conflicts were remembered. Our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, reports.
He is the first British Prime Minister to mark Armistice Day in France since Winston Churchill. A poignant show of solidarity, renewing European relations. On this day of customary commemoration and silent remembrance. At the National Memorial Arboretum, the Duchess of Edinburgh stepped in for the King and spoke to the crowds.
They mingle not with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at familiar tables of home. They have no lot in our labour of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam.
We must never forget. It's hard for us to consider what hardship went on in the past.
They left their mothers, their wives, their children for our freedom.
Respect and honour, because we wouldn't be here today, would we, if it wasn't for them.
And here in central London, at the cenotaph, more wreaths laid, some by children, as the loss of youth is taught to a new generation.
This is always a day of great reflection, a reminder of hard-fought freedoms. And with conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, those freedoms feel ever fragile.
It is 110 years since the start of the First World War. Service and sacrifice still remembered through public events and private reflection. Laura Bundock, Sky News in central London.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories we will be discussing, our top story, which is also on the front page of The Guardian. Its headline, Assisted Dying Bill reveals strict safeguards on protecting patients. That new news when we come back.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. People seeking to end their own lives would have to self-administer the necessary drugs, according to details of the new assisted dying bill due to be published in Parliament tomorrow. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, is under pressure to resign over what he knew about a priest who abused as many as 130 boys and young men over the course of 5 decades. And the Kremlin has denied Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin spoke in a phone call last week, with US President-elect urging the Russian leader not to escalate the war in Ukraine. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. So let's check out the front pages then, shall we? Starting with the Daily Mail. It writes of the calls for the Archbishop of Canterbury to quit after a report alleged he failed to act on abuse within the Church of England. The Telegraph looks at this story too, saying that the pressure is mounting on Justin Welby. The Metro also leads on the calls for the Archbishop to go. The Prime Minister's visit to France is on the front of the Financial Times, as EU countries are expected to spend billions more on defence after Trump's victory. The Eye writes of a potential hike in water bills after the Water Minister, Emma Hardy, said money was needed to repair Britain's crumbling infrastructure. Gary Lineker is on the front of The Sun after he announced his retirement from Match of the Day. The Guardian reports on the assisted dying bill, writing that it revealed strict safeguards on protecting patients. And the Daily Star leads on the Premier League referee David Coote, suspended after video appears to show him insulting Liverpool FC Jurgen Klopp. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. A couple of stories dominating, has to be said, one of which is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And is the church turning on itself, effectively? Pippa, can he survive this, and what is the allegation?
Well, it looks very difficult for him tonight, because this is an allegation about a man called John Smith, who was involved in serious and multiple examples of abuse of boys when he was running Christian children's camps in the 1970s and 80s. And it turns out that there's a report commissioned by the church last week which established that Justin Welby was a volunteer, as a much younger man, obviously, at those camps. And it concluded that it was unlikely that, while he perhaps didn't know the gravity of the crimes that were being perpetrated, they thought he would most likely have at least heard, rumours, or it was unlikely that he was completely unaware. But, there's a world where you can think, well, maybe he wasn't aware at that time. It's a long time ago. There was a culture of cover-up in the church over, or in institutions generally, over abuse like this. But where really the problem deepens for him is that in 2013, one of these victims of abuse came forward to the church. And, of course, Justin Welby was Archbishop of Canterbury at that time, and by then, and no real action was taken. And subsequently, John Smith went off to Zimbabwe, where he's now dead. He died in 2018, but where he faced charges of manslaughter for a 16-year-old boy at one of these camps. The case was dismissed, but he relocated to South Africa, where he was removed as the leader of his local church amid allegations of his behaviour. So this behaviour clearly continued, and at no time did the church refer it to the police back in 2013. I think by that point, that it was pretty well known that the Catholic Church had a history of cover-up and the magnitude of the repercussions of the institutional abuse that took place in the Catholic Church is well known. But there were already examples of the Church of England covering up its history of abuse. And his instinct, Justin Welby, the allegation seems to be that his instinct was to hope that this would all go away, not least because this individual had moved abroad. And that survivors would give up their fight for the truth, which is, ultimately...
I suppose the balance is, was there a cover-up, or was there, as he suggested, a failure to energetically inquire further, effectively? And are people out to get him for other reasons? For example, his stance on, lesbian and gay rights, for example, or even, bizarrely, his very outspoken views on the Rwanda policy. I mean, there's reasons why people are against him separately.
I think that's what his defenders would say this was about, but what it comes down to is, look who is saying this. This isn't coming from outside of the church, it's coming from inside the church. We have 7,000 members. 7,000 members of the Church of England now signed this petition saying he's got to go. That petition was started by the Synod, essentially the Parliament of the Church of England.
Or three people, yes, who were supposed to represent different parts of the church in order to counter those allegations that it's a specific group.
Gaining thousands of signatures by the hour. You've got the Bishop of Newcastle, the first bishop to put this head above the parapet and say he has to go. It feels to me like it's kind of reaching a sort of critical mass. We see these things a lot where it just looks quite obvious. As soon as that report came out, I think he was done. Obviously, the word unlikely is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. That's about as close as I think you can get to calling someone a liar in a quite a sort of soft way, but in the way that these internal inquiries often don't want to say they don't want to say it explicitly, but to suggest that the Archbishop of Canterbury is unlikely that his version of events is credible is about as damning as it gets for one of these reports. So I think he didn't bother tonight, and I think he'll probably be the last person that realises it. But the way it feels from looking at this from the outside is that we're reaching that moment where it's kind of game over.
Yes, time to go, Archbishop, is the front page of the Metro. Why was this re-looked at now, so many years after this man died, or indeed when the Archbishop first became aware of it in 2013? Do we know why?
It has been bubbling. This has been bubbling under the surface for a very, very long time. Obviously, the fact that this inquiry was even launched. These questions haven't, as Pippa rightly said, these questions have been haunting him for a while, and I think he hoped they'd go away. But as we've seen, is that these things never go away.
And the report was published last week, which is why it's sort of become more of an issue again now. Now, it is the case that Archbishops of Canterbury conventionally retire when they hit 70, and he's about a year, I think, off that. So he'd been expected to announce his retirement. They have a long retirement in the next few months anyway. He might find that ends up being expedited under pressure. His response so far seems to have been to just add to the apologies.
That's the problem. Well, it was quite a bullish statement
about clerical abuse, as he has done, so far, and ride out the storm. But I don't think
he helped himself.
Unlikely that he's going to be able to.
Yeah, I don't think he helped himself with his statement today, which was essentially, "I'm going nowhere. Suck it up," which I think is, not helpful. Yes, he apologised again, but at the end of the day, he knew in 2013. He says. And the report says, well, that's not necessarily credible. We think you probably knew before then.
And these were hundreds of men, now men, then boys, children, impacted by this, and with every sort of attempt to at its most extreme cover up, but also potentially minimise what they went through. Well, rather, this is how they would interpret it, as minimising it by trying to sort of glaze over it and move on. Although, of course, he has called out in very strong terms the abuse that took place. Now,
but I think also there's no one out there defending him either. That's the problem. He has been very quick to condemn others very quickly within the church. I don't know if anyone heard the testimony of Giles Fraser, a priest, this morning on the Today programme, which was incredibly moving. About
he was a victim himself, but
not of this, but of abuse himself, and just said, look, you cannot reform if this is what you're sort of dragging along with you. So I think this is, I think, nip it in the bud, I'd say.
Interestingly, I mean, he will, go down in history as the person who, crowned a king and carried out the funeral service for a queen.
Yeah, these things are tough. These are hard things to walk away from. It's one of the most prominent jobs in public life in Britain. But that doesn't mean you get a free pass.
And, again, we go back to institutions who are accused you know, be it Post Office or the blood inquiry. It's, you know, it's been the story of the last year, hasn't
Absolutely.
it? Absolutely. Let's go to news that has just broken. What is in the assisted dying bill, effectively, and what are the protections for those who are deeply concerned about this, of which there are no doubt many?
So this is a backbench bill, but because it came top of the ballot in this rather sort of arcane system that exists in Parliament, it's receiving the backing of the... it's a vote of conscience because it's on assisted dying, but it has received government support in terms of the drafting of the legislation to make sure... I mean, that's like conventional. It's not, they're not taking sides on it. And Kim Ledbetter, who is the MP that has put this forward, says it's the best possible legislation and suggests that it's going to be the strictest protections and safeguards in the world. And some of the things that the bill includes are that 2 independent doctors have to be satisfied that a person is eligible. That individual has to be terminally ill and expected to die within 6 months. And the application then has to be approved by a High Court judge. And crucially, and this is, I think, the first time we established this, is that the medicine has to be self-administered, which obviously raises questions about people's capacity towards the end of life and whether they can. And that the coercion of a patient, which is obviously what a lot of the critics of the legislation suggest, that it's like a slippery slope, that people could end up being encouraged down this route. It could be criminal. A coercion of a patient would be a criminal offence punished by up to 14 years in prison. So these are pretty tough safeguards, whether they're enough to convince
mental health
people.
and disabilities will be excluded from it, which is what the problem I think lots of people have seen in Canada, where this bill, a bill was introduced and then it's sort of been tacked on and tacked on and tacked on, and then eventually you've got the situation where actually suddenly the sort of justifications for ending one's life is, you know, is actually suddenly quite broad and open to abuse. I do think the people who are putting this forward, the MPs who are supporting it, I'm not sure they're going about it in the best possible way. So they've sort of published the summary of the bill today. We weren't allowed to see it before, you know, deadline for the papers. It's just been published online. It does feel like they're trying to sort of ramrod it through, which I think is upsetting a few people. I think it's making people think, actually, do we really want to make this massive fundamental change in law without a much longer time to, A, scrutinise the bill, maybe, you know, sort of put forward, you know, different versions of the bill, see what goes forward. The quirk of the system being that, as Pippa said, it is a backbench bill, means that it has limited time in Parliament. But do we really think that actually for something this massive, perhaps...
So you're suggesting the government needs to adopt it and shape it? It's
very difficult when it's
very difficult to do when it's a vote of conscience. You've got cabinet ministers openly saying that they're not going to back it. You know, Wes Streeting coming out and saying he's not sure the NHS has got the capacity to do this, which is one way of putting it. And, you know, I think the Prime Minister has been talking about this on his trip. I'm not sure I can say what he's going to say because it's embargoed till 6 a.m. But, you know, he is not backing this definitively either way, and he is raising the concerns about it as well.
Not backing it definitively because that's the instruction he's given his cabinet. But what we do know is that previously Keir Starmer has said that he would support legislation on assisted dying coming forward, and MP's been given the chance to have a free vote.
That does not mean he supports it.
No, and while he's instructed his cabinet not to sort of go out and campaign...
Something they've ignored, frankly.
It is the case that both Wes Streeting, who has subsequently suggested he's got concerns about the ability of the NHS to deal with sort of the palliative, you know, thinks that the palliative care system isn't sufficient and therefore people might feel that this is their only option compared to palliative care, and Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary. So the two departments, really, which are going to be most involved with this, if it comes through, Health and Justice, have both opposed it. The majority of the Cabinet, however, are expected to back it. There are a couple of really big names that are undecided, people like Rachel Reeves and Yvette Cooper and so on. And actually, I think they represent quite a large chunk of MPs. They reckon about 100 MPs are still, within the Labour Party, are still undecided as to which way they're going to go.
Even if it gets through the Commons, though, this is going to get shredded to pieces in the Lords.
So concerns about how fast legislation is going through, but if you look at the Telegraph, there's a sort of implied concern about how quickly somebody could...
The 21 days,
yes, 21 days.
From the first doctors, from the first sort of signing a piece of paper saying, I want to do this, you have to do that twice at various points. You have to have 2 doctors. Then it goes to a judge. But the scope is you could do it within 21 days, which, frankly, if you look at it from the other way, is that, look, the point of this is that if you're trying to end your life quickly because you're in an extreme amount of suffering and pain, obviously you need an expedited way of doing this. Otherwise, you know, what's the point? Because, you know, if it takes 6 months to do it, and you're already only allowed to do. You're only allowed to apply for it if you are 6 months. You know, you have 6 months to live. 2 doctors say. Then you're into a situation. Well, what's the point?
And it must be said that some of its biggest supporters are people who either they themselves have a terminal illness or indeed have cared for a family member, often really just having the only option of going to Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland at the end and having cared for their family member throughout that period, and in most cases not being able to take that route in Switzerland. I think it's quite telling that some of the biggest advocates are those that have been through that experience themselves and see that actually this would be a much more humane way for their loved ones to end their life.
Just to say that the other concern is that this is the thin end of the wedge, and once it's on the statute book, it starts to get amended, and then you cannot.
Yeah. Controversial issues.
Very.
And lots more, no doubt, tomorrow on that. Lots more still to come on the programme. The Sun reporting that the Russian President Vladimir Putin was so close to firing nuclear warheads in 2022 that crisis meetings were being held over the fallout hitting the UK. Back with that.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview, joined once again by the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Again, to each of your papers, Harry starts with you. And your story, in fact, that Liz Truss spent the dying days of her... What do you call it in office?
Her doomed premiership.
Her doomed premiership, studying weather maps in case this happened. Tell us more.
Exactly. So cast your mind back to October 2022. Joe Biden appeared one day on television saying the world is as close as it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis to a nuclear incident. Obviously, that set lots of hairs running. And it turns out there was some fairly horrifying US intelligence that was shared with allies, essentially, that Putin was considering using a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield of Ukraine or testing a much larger weapon in the Black Sea. And now this sent, obviously, the Western alliance into absolute freefall. We've picked at this a little bit. It sort of emerged a little bit at the time. I remember Ben Wallace, the then Defence Secretary, jetted over to DC for sort of crisis meetings, and no one was quite sure what's happened. Anyway, a few years later, we're now starting to really pick at what happened, and we're revealing tomorrow, in fact, revealing an updated book about Liz Truss.
Harry?
Who could it be? Which is out this week in all good bookshops. But essentially, after she'd resigned as Prime Minister, saying she was going to go, there's a sort of 5-6 day period where, she was bringing, she had to wait for the Tories to choose a new leader. And in this exact moment, this incredible crisis broke where the Americans were basically saying there's a 50-50 chance that Putin's going to let off a nuke. Now, we're not that far from Russia, or not that far from the Black Sea, or indeed Ukraine's 1,700 miles, really tops. And they were looking at the weather maps and actually looking at that, if he does this, the fallout from this is going to spread across Europe. Remember in Chernobyl, when, it reached Scotland, lots of sheep in Scotland were affected by that. And this would be basically, essentially, an attack on all of the West, attack on NATO. Quite how close we came, it seems. The fact that they were convening crisis meetings in Downing Street with the Prime Minister, looking at, essentially, the BBC weather map and saying, look, the wind is going this direction. If it goes that direction, we'll be all right. But if the wind changes, we're in real trouble here. And you just think, what a farce of that whole entire time was, with Liz Truss in there. Was that exactly the leader you'd want in that scenario? And B, quite how delicate the situation in Ukraine was. And now you can kind of understand the reticence from the Biden White House about escalating the situation in Ukraine. If this is what they actually thought he was going to do in 2022, you can see why they're being incredibly cautious now about using weapons, Western weapons, to strike Ukraine, because we could be back where we were 2 years ago.
Which Zelensky still wants of Biden, who himself is labelled like Liz Truss is at the time.
Exactly. A terrifying sort of glimpse into... It reads like something out of a sort of Cold War novel. When we read about, when we report about North Korean troops being in, fighting in Ukraine, on basically North Korean troops fighting on the continent of Europe, and you just think, 10 years ago, this sounds like something out of Tom Clancy, and this is happening right now.
We've only got 20 seconds left.
Sorry.
Should we just show the papers we were going to talk about?
Sorry.
One of which is that the Prime Minister's been speaking as he landed in Azerbaijan for the COP Climate Summit, saying that there's a big opportunity after the election of Donald Trump to get ahead in the race for green investment. And the second story indeed was about COP, and COP agrees carbon trading deal despite fears that the US climate fight is on the back burner. The US standing firm for now, but we know what's coming. Pippa, you'll have to do that next time. I'm afraid I did it very quickly.
I'm going to be quiet now.
No, it was fascinating. Harry Cole, Pippa Crerar, thank you both very much indeed. See you at 11. Here's the weather now, and the next couple of days will bring good sunny spells to many, but starry skies overnight will lead to some frost and fog. There'll be a mainly dry, bright and frosty start tomorrow, but there will be a few showers near southeastern coasts and fog in places, some dense and freezing. Ireland and northern and western parts of the UK are most at risk. The morning looks like staying dry with long sunny spells for most. Early fog will be slow to clear. East Anglia and southeast England will be cloudier with a scattering of coastal showers. Touch cooler too, cold where fog lingers and breezy in the southeast. Pippa, Harry back for Sky News at 11 with details of the assisted dying bill being published in Parliament. We'll hear from both sides of the debate.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered.